If you've been around horses for long enough, you will have seen a horse or two that hates having their feet handled. And when I say hates, I mean they are the reason their farrier has an accidental death claim in his life insurance policy. They despise it so much that getting near their feet is a legitimate safety hazard for their handlers and also for themselves. Maybe this is your horse, and if it is, there is great news, because this behavior can be changed without ever being harsh or hard on your horse. It makes sense when you think about it. We are predators, groping our horses' only means of movement and escape, often without thinking twice. We assume that we have the right to do this, and of course, our horses' feet do need to be taken care of for the sake of their own health and well-being. The trouble often starts with how we go about it. Horses tend to not like having their legs and feet touched, let alone picked up. I mean, let's think about the mechanics for a moment. Do horses stand on three legs naturally? Yes, if they are in pain. They alter their center of gravity to accommodate this strange posture, but overall they manage it quite well. Can a horse walk on three legs? Yes, if he wants to. But, and this is fairly important, he never stands with his leg lifted in the air at the elevation and posture we demand for more than a few seconds. Why would he? It's uncomfortable, it's awkward, and it's an unnecessary waste of energy. We ask our horses to perform a natural action in an unnatural way for an unnatural period of time, while we mess with his center of gravity by cutting and hammering on the foot. In the best case scenario, this feels strange and jarring. In the worst case scenario, the affected muscles and even the foot may be in pain. Yet we expect our horses to be fine with this because it doesn't look so hard to us. And we have the right to work with him however we want. If this makes you roll your eyes, I understand. It's not the way we are used to thinking about our horses, but it's one of the reasons why so many horses have angst around having their feet handled. For some horses, this angst becomes so intense that it blooms into a full-fledged phobia, and the horse becomes more and more violent in his protests. We tend to think that adding restraints to force the horse into submission is the way to go. Most of us know that a caged and trapped animal is the most dangerous one there is, humans included. But this method of either physically restraining or making the horse feel essentially trapped is a commonly used solution to the foot phobia. Of course, the anxiety of the horse escalates. The restraints get tighter, and so it spirals into a dangerous and out of control situation. The worst part is, none of this is necessary. Not too long ago, I had the opportunity to work with a horse who had deep concerns about having his feet worked with. He had had a previous injury to the fetlocks on his hind legs, and was naturally weary of having his feet worked with at all. The method of restraining him had confirmed his suspicions that any work around his feet was threatening and painful. He soon spiraled into a state of panic and defense when his feet were addressed. He was prone to kicking without warning. He had learnt that asking nicely was ignored and punished, and only a stout kick was heeded when he wanted to communicate his anxiety. It was learnt behavior, which worked, because all the smaller signs were ignored or punished. My first test run around his feet yielded probably an inevitable result. I needed to apply milking cream to the old injuries on the back of his fetlocks on the hind feet. I approached him calmly, showed him the milking cream, calmly moved over to his hind end, gently bent down to apply the cream, and then, when it was all done, stood up and gave an exhale in a very meditative, yoga-like fashion. I smiled and murmured, "There you go, that wasn't so bad." The wheels seemed to be turning in his mind, and I had just reached the conclusion that all was well when he changed his mind. He decided to sock me one on the shoulder, just in case. I was completely caught off guard and burst out laughing at the absurdity of it. He seemed to decide that, actually, He wasn't cool with it after all, and he would appreciate it if I didn't do that again. I completely understood what he meant. Trauma lives in the body for a long time, and this was just how he learned to cope with anxiety. We needed a new method. I had done a number of T-touch courses and had learnt a neat method of bringing awareness to the horse's body and the position of the feet using a wand, fairly similar to a dressage whip. I decided to use this technique to work on the foot anxiety that this horse experienced. I wanted to work in such a way that he was engaged, but never push him over the line into his fight, flight, or freeze mode. I wanted to work with the parasympathetic nervous system to form new experiences around having his feet handled. My objective was to be non-invasive and brief. Why brief? Because that is the concentration span of the average horse. I mean, honestly, it's the concentration span of the average human. If I work for too long, it becomes distressing and I activate his sympathetic fight or flight nervous system. Short, sweet, and not scary. That was my goal. I began by taking my own dressage whip and covering it in a bandage. This makes it soft and as non-threatening as possible. I showed him the covered whip and stroked it firmly down his neck and over his body in areas where he was comfortable. I remained standing at his head and simply extended my arm with the whip down his body on both sides, thus keeping me and my spectacularly bruised shoulder out of firing range. He accepted the whip quite quickly. At this point, if he gave me a small sign that he was uncomfortable, I backed off. He needed to know that I was listening to him. He didn't need to resort to kicking. While still standing at his head, I ran the bandaged whip down the inside and outside of his legs, on both sides, tapping the hooves very gently with the handle of the whip. I did this once on each leg, gave him a carrot, and left. Short, sweet, not scary. This was repeated for a few days, until the bandaged whip running up and down his legs and tapping on his feet didn't bother him at all. Next, I removed the bandage and repeated the same procedure of running the whip firmly but gently up and down the legs, tapping the feet with the handle. I stayed at his head, safely out of harm's way. He accepted this very quickly and within a few days was ready to move to the next phase, running the whip and then my hands down his legs, then standing back and tapping the feet. He was slightly concerned at first, but by backing off when he showed slight signs of anxiety, he became aware that I was listening to him and that he was safe. A few days of these 5-minute sessions, and the whip was replaced with only my hands and me tapping the outside of his feet with my knuckles. This long process is known as conditioning and is a tried and tested method for training any horse that will always yield positive results when you apply it skillfully. With horses, less is often more. From this point, I introduced a small hammer and would hammer the outside of the hoof gently instead of using my knuckles. This evolved into harder hammering and then a bigger hammer. Not once did he begin to feel threatened or go into fight or flight mode. If he lifted his foot as if to strike, I would simply back off and wait for him to put it down again before continuing. I began asking to pick up his feet, but instead of working on them, I moved the foot in small circles, relaxing the shoulders and giving him a positive experience with having his feet handled. At this stage, he actually began to fall asleep when I picked up his feet, as he relaxed his shoulders and his hips so much. I was absolutely thrilled. It wasn't long before he allowed me to gently tap the underside of the hoof with the hammer. And if he became anxious, I would put the hammer down and do some circles until he relaxed. At this point, he'd stopped lifting his feet to kick and allowed me to handle his feet with complete comfort. As his confidence grew, his traumatic reactions became less and less. His new farrier worked slowly and gently with him, while I held his halter on a loose lead. Again, less is more. Within 2 cycles, he stood and slept while the farrier worked on him. Within 4 or 5 cycles, he was fully shod, calm, and possibly one of the best horses in the herd. Through the work on his feet, he became an incredible horse, gentle and reliable. It took time to recondition him and move him past his fear of having his feet handled. But it was worth it 1,000 times over. He deserves a life free of fear and anxiety. And with patience, I was able to help him get that. You can do the same for your horse, and your horse and farrier will thank you for it.